The world is moving, and the balance of power is teetering under the weight of something immovable. You weren't intended to look beyond the illusion, pull back the curtain, and discover what was never meant to be shown. Despite the odds, you succeeded. That altered everything. Your words, presence, and unflinching disobedience sent shockwaves across locations where secrets were supposed to remain hidden. They took note. The ones who built their empires on quiet, went undetected, and ruled reality from the shadows. They noticed. A message is now emerging, not from a leader or an elite figure, but from someone who has spent a lifetime in the depths of that secret world, someone taught to defend without being seen, to follow without question. But this time, they breached the coding, not for power or confession, but for you. They see you, they dread you, and now they call you the Chosen One. The Chosen One. You are not intended to wake awake. Now it's time to bring them down from inside. A discovery challenges the basis of everything previously thought to be true. Denial is a fortification created to block out unpleasant reality, sheltering the mind from burdens that are too heavy to bear. For years, the agent lived behind the walls of that castle, following an ideology that required unquestioning loyalty. Every command was part of a greater plan. Every classified file is hidden away for the sake of order. They walked through life with determination, doing their responsibilities without hesitation. That is, until an encounter shattered the routine, when they came across something, or rather someone, who made them doubt everything. At first, it was simply static, another voice lost in the never-ending buzz of supposition. The world was filled with those who claimed to have discovered secret worlds, people that delved into darkness they did not belong in. The agent has seen similar data before. Fringe theorists, self-proclaimed investigators, and those who believed they had decoded the unreadable. They were diversions and irrelevant peculiarities. But then, amid the chaos, one detail emerged. A name, a date, a snippet of information that was never intended to be spoken. Beyond classified boundaries, a detail so exact and difficult to ignore that it broke their confidence. Skepticism waned. Logic argued it was a coincidence. But instinct told differently. The intellect trained to recognize lies discovered none. So they performed what they were taught to do. They scoured. They reviewed papers buried behind layers of deceit, cross-referenced stories, and identified the threads of a pattern purposefully concealed in the fabric of seeming randomness. What they discovered contradicted the fundamental basis of their beliefs. The revelation was unforgiving. The deceit did not emanate from remote rivals or faceless antagonists. It had been arranged by people they had blindly trusted, the cornerstones of truth. They had upheld manipulating scaffolding that were meant to hide rather than disclose. And the person they had previously disregarded, no longer an outsider. But there's something more. Maybe a disturbance. Perhaps an oddity, but certainly notable. The agent was no longer the same. They stood now, not as a servant of the system, but as someone who had seen through its carefully crafted illusion. The truth had been revealed, and it was too weighty to ignore. If your heart is overflowing with God's blessings, let that love radiate. Click the super thank you button and donate $20 or more to sow seeds of faith that will change countless lives. Your giving exemplifies His richness. Be a channel for His grace, and watch His kingdom grow through you. There is nothing concealed that will not be revealed. There is no secret that will remain hidden. Luke 8:17. Certain things were never intended to be buried. The truth has a way of rising, regardless of how deep the darkness attempts to devour it. It's like the roots of an old tree bursting through the stone, like the first break in a dam before flooding. There comes a time when what was concealed must be disclosed. That moment is now. There is a planet underneath this one, a realm of whispers and hidden doors handed down through generations of individuals who felt they had complete power over reality. They established their empire in secret, erasing people from history and burying locations that should not have been forgotten. But you understand what the term means. Nothing stays concealed forever. The agent had spent their lives strolling the corridors of power, trained to observe without being seen and to act without hesitation. But even they were unprepared for what lay underneath. It began with minor tales that never reached the headlines. People who went without a trace, leaving no name to remember. There are no headlines or breaking news alerts, just stillness. The kind of quiet that communicates loudly to those who have been taught to listen. What started off as a typical case evolved into something quite different. As they delved deeper, the earth underneath them seemed to move beneath the polished floors of magnificent institutions. Behind doors labeled with terms like authorized people, only down beyond the streets. People go on walks every day without thinking twice. There was something more, not just an emptiness, but an intention. Not simply a blank area, but a design. A network. Vast and complex. Hidden in plain sight. Woven into the very foundations of society itself. And the instant the agents saw it, they knew it was never supposed to be discovered. They had spent years thinking that the world operated in particular ways, that rules were important, and that systems had a purpose. That history was written and not altered. But now, they now knew the truth. This was not about corruption or criminality. It was all about control. A control so total and expertly veiled that most people would go their whole lives without ever noticing its presence. But something went wrong. A defect in the system. A flaw in the design. Someone, somehow, had disrupted the foundation. They had spent a lifetime strengthening it. Everything led to you. Perhaps you never intended to see it. Perhaps you were not looking, but you did. They are well aware of this. You were not intended to grasp what you've seen, to put together what was never intended to be joined. And yet, here you are, still standing, observing, and knowing. And that scares them. The deeper they went, the more disturbing the situation grew. Some of these passages used to have a role in forgotten networks that had been abandoned over time. Unfinished endeavors leave behind remnants. However, others disagreed. They were recent, they were purposeful, and they were occupied. This wasn't just a criminal hideout or a remnant from the past. What grew underneath was something old, with roots much deeper than any one time in history. An unknown and unspoiled sect flowing through the subterranean with precision that spoke of power, influence, and protection from above. Their presence was neither a rumor or the result of a conspiracy. This was something planned, concealed in plain sight. There was no doubting the might of those who guarded it. These were not wanderers or drifters seeking sanctuary in the darkness. They were inextricably linked with the fundamental systems that rule society. Figures who stood in boardrooms, made choices behind closed doors, and ensured that the system never looked too closely. However, no secret is forever. The agent found more surface ledgers than were intended to be recorded. Correspondences, coded instructions. The names used were not obscure. They wielded influence, and when disclosure endangered their authority, they responded quickly. Evidence was removed. Structures burnt. Accidents were planned with meticulous precision. But this time, their escape was not certain. Their well-planned escape, the well-designed road to vanishing as they had always failed. A last path, a last retreat had been cut off before they could utilize it. The underground became their jail, and the same network that had allowed them to stay untouchable became their doom. There was no way out, and this was no accident. The accuracy and timing. It was much too designed to be coincidence. Someone had interfered. Someone they hadn't planned for. Someone outside their sophisticated network of control. And that scared them for the first time. They had to ask a question they had never considered. Who had done it? And when their hold on concealment loosened, their focus shifted to one spot. To the only abnormality they had ignored. To the unaccounted for presence. Now they were looking for solutions. And they were looking for you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought to light. Luke 8:17. They have always dreaded the truth. It travels like fire over parched fields. Once lit, unstoppable. You do not need to push it. You do not need permission to share it. It is impossible to undo what has been seen or expressed. That is why they spent their lives attempting to tame it. That's why they created elaborate systems to keep it hidden. For years, they have sat at the top, meticulously crafting their reality, ensuring that only what they approve makes it into the world. They shaped history to suit their purposes, determining what was known and what was eliminated. Their effect was seen across countries and inside governments. Finance and media. Every pillar of society was designed to serve them, and for a long time, it worked. But there is always a fissure in the foundation. They didn't anticipate anything to sneak through. They never imagined that a single speech or moment might trigger a chain reaction they could no longer contain. And yet, here you are. You were not meant to know what you know. You were not intended to see what you saw. They had a plan, a script, a tightly regulated storyline, and you didn't fit in. Your queries were not meant to be asked. Your voice was never meant to soar above the static they designed to keep people blind. So they used their normal strategies. They mocked. They remained silent. They labeled. Conspiracy. Misinformation. Dangerous. Same terms. The same weaponry. They recycled over and again, intending to shut down whatever they couldn't manage. But this time, it didn't work since your words were trapped. Everyone listened. Perhaps not everyone, not everything at once, but enough. Enough to cause them discomfort. Enough to make them desperate. And that's when you realize they're scared. See? When lying works. When their machine is functioning smoothly, they don't mind. They do not bother to answer. They do not even recognize voices like yours. But the instant they start fighting back, shutting you off, you know you've crossed the line. Because once seen, truth cannot be hidden. You've done something they never expected. You did not just talk. You had folks thinking. You had them seek for flaws in the plot, contradictions, and things they weren't supposed to discover. And now? Now it is too late for them. They might attempt to repress it. They may attempt to quiet it. But truth spreads like wildfire. It does not need authorization. It does not wait for permission. It simply spreads. They first considered it as an anomaly, a little nuisance that could be resolved using standard means. The suppression machinery is triggered. Labels were allocated and contemptuous speech was used. Mechanisms for discrediting and containing debunking pieces proliferated throughout the internet landscape. Algorithms altered visibility, ensuring that your remarks reached only individuals who were already predisposed to dismiss them. The normal playbook was completed perfectly, but then something occurred. Your words did not fade into oblivion. They spread. They had an impact. People didn't simply listen. They investigated, cross-referenced, and discovered pieces that matched too neatly to be ignored. It wasn't simply a hypothesis anymore. It was the blueprint for something hiding in plain sight. That was the point at which they intensified. When simple misdirection fails, more harsh deterrents were used. Financial instability appeared out of nowhere. Frozen assets and incomprehensible debts. Sudden problems in many aspects of life. Social circles. Fractured. Relationships are strained. Invisible hands. Pulling strings. Just enough to isolate without revealing the puppeteers. Then came the darkness. Figures linger on the outskirts. Vehicles were stationed in inappropriate locations. There were times when strangers seemed to know much too much. The transition from passive to active occurred gradually. The early warnings were deliberate and concealed. A communication that was delivered but not received. A faint menace crept into the discourse. The warnings were apparent. A close call with an out-of-control automobile that had no need to be there. An unexplained breakdown of a safety system. Something designed to be infallible. A sudden ailment. A sickness that is too quick and focused to be a coincidence. Every step is meant to guarantee quiet. But stillness never arrived. Every carefully devised scheme unraveled before it could be accomplished. Every effort to obliterate you encountered hidden resistance. They were unable to grasp their defeat. Probability ruled. You shouldn't have lasted so long. That the chain of events should have wiped you before the truth became apparent. Nonetheless, you remained standing. An aberration in their regulated equation. It was beyond calculation and influence. It was not luck. It wasn't a chance. It was something else completely. Something they had never planned for. And this scared them for centuries. They felt that their authority was absolute. They manipulated narratives, imposed results, and changed history to suit their purposes. Every danger has been eliminated before it could appear. Each deviance was immediately squashed. But they ignored something. An invisible force is pushing beyond their estimates. Regardless of how methodically they organized events, there were holes and fissures in their strategy that defied explanation. Every botched strategy, every unraveling plan, and every seemingly impossible escape transpired. They were not coincidences. There was someone observing, meddling in ways they couldn't foresee or avoid. There were old indications hidden behind layers of lost wisdom, dismissed as useless relics of civilization's vast history. But those who looked at them knew better. They weren't completely random. They were not for adornment. These were warnings, echoes of a reality that will not be eradicated. Then it occurred. Something awoke. The spy had not been looking for explanations in forgotten symbols. However, as their eyes followed the engraved lines, something within them moved. It was not information handed down via training or acquired through experience. It was recognition, something buried deep inside, emerging as if it had always been there to be recalled. It was never only about control, conspiracies, or corruption. The whole game was structured to hide something considerably grander. For so long, the agent depended on logic, rules, and the structure that defined their world. They were now on the verge of something beyond understanding, a conflict that went beyond institutions, authority, and all they had been taught to believe to be true. The conflict was not between flesh and blood. It was not limited to politics or intelligence battles. This was something else completely. And you, intentionally or not, have seen the depths of it. There was no turning back from what had been revealed. Certain forces could not be bribed, intimidated, or coerced. There were debts that could not be repaid via power or fortune, and the repercussions were woven into creation itself. Those who believed they had mastered deceit were suddenly learning the consequences of their actions. Their secret dominion was unraveling, and the darkness they'd wielded for so long had turned against them. Those who had formerly wielded unassailable authority were suddenly fading, not by choice, but due to need. They were not escaping justice. They were fleeing from something far worse. And for the first time, they realized what actual dread meant. Those who formerly controlled reality are now caught in a nightmare of their own creation. Their once absolute power is now crumbling beneath the weight of a force they can neither comprehend or control. The leaders who formerly acted with unshakable confidence are dissolving. Rational brains are plunging into chaos, and carefully maintained facades are collapsing under the weight of unknown influences. Those who stay live in a condition of constant terror. The armies they previously led have turned against them, unrelenting and voracious. The whispers that once gave them strength now haunt them from inside. The atrocities they formerly perpetrated on others now haunt them in the dark of night. There is no sanctuary or retreat, because it was never simply about control. This was never just a game of riches, power, or strategy. It was totally beyond their understanding. They mocked the concept of invisible powers, rejected religion as a weakness, and weaponized belief against others while claiming exemption from the repercussions. They were confident that they could resist the consequences, bend the reality to their will, rewrite the basic rules of existence. However, reality does not surrender to hubris. The agent was formerly governed by skepticism. They are now confronted with an indisputable reality after seeing happenings that transcend logic. Something is occurring. The symbols concealed in the depths, the unexplained failures of every silencing effort, and the internal disintegration of their once mighty network. None of it is random. This is not a simple disaster. It is something planned, something unavoidable. The agent cannot explain it, but they are no longer required to. They've seen what happens to people who attempt to control the uncontrollable. People who were previously untouchable now murmur in dread. Their assurance diminished. Their empire is in shambles. There's a name. They dare not talk. An entity. They blaspheme from the shadows. A presence they blame for their demise. They saw it as the force that demolished the foundation they had spent their lives constructing. However, the reality is more simpler and more scary. This was always unavoidable. Their fate was predetermined long before they assumed control. The energy they battled so hard to repress was never defeated, and the whole extent of their dishonesty has finally become apparent. There are times in life when the curtain is broken, illusions crumble, and the unmistakable reality leaves no space for question. The agent has reached that point. They had spent their lives following commands, believing in a just system that protected people who never earned their allegiance. They believed they were serving something bigger. They now grasped the reality. They were never protectors. They were pawns. And only via an incomprehensible power were they able to perceive what had been concealed all along. It wasn't an intelligence leak or a well-placed source that brought them here. It was something unexpected, something that at first seemed insignificant. A voice, a message, and a thread. They saw no need to follow. They'd heard numerous hypotheses before, with people claiming to have the missing piece to an invisible jigsaw. Something was different this time, however. The way the words remained, how they fit into areas where no response had ever been, kept drawing them back. What should have been simply another forgettable noise in a sea of supposition became something they couldn't ignore. At first, their reaction was dismissive. It was simple to think that the relationships were simply coincidences, and that the conclusions formed were too broad. But the study took an unexpected path. A name from a forgotten report. An inconsistency in a closed case file. A relationship that should not have existed, yet clearly did. So they continued going. As they probed further, the image became apparent. The world in which they had placed their confidence was an illusion. The foundation upon which they had built their careers had been precisely crafted, not to inform, but to deceive. What seemed to be isolated incidents were really threads of a meticulously woven illusion that stretched far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The walls on which they had previously depended were no longer in place. They were cages that kept the facts hidden while giving the impression that they knew everything. Those they had collaborated with were not allies, but architects of a larger plan. And yet, despite having no clearance, no inside access, and no reason to believe, this lone voice had discovered the cracks in the foundation. They were not correct about everything, not necessarily in the manner they had anticipated, but they saw the outline of something big and evil long before anybody else did. As a result, an irrevocable event occurred. The agent was no longer just a cog in the machine. They were offered an option, a door that has never been before. And now that it was open, there was no turning back. This was never only about backroom transactions or invisible people pulling the ropes. This was about something far larger than corruption or criminality. It was about waking up to the fact that the conflicts that took place in boardrooms and underground networks were just a mirror of something deeper, something that moved unnoticed around the globe, altering the course of history without most people recognizing it. There were forces at work that no intelligence briefing would ever mention, forces that molded fate itself. And without even recognizing what was going on, that voice had always fought against them. The agent now realizes who they formerly pursued and who they previously discarded. Whenever there is a serious adversary, the true conflict had always been something else, something old, something battled in quiet for millennia. And now, for the first time, they can see with clarity that the voice they had previously disregarded is no longer a whisper in the dark. It's an ally. They will no longer avoid it, because they now understand. Those who tried to eradicate it have already failed. Those who formerly ruled reality from the shadows are now seeing the fall of their power. The carefully guarded curtain is breaking, exposing those who thought they were immune to consequences, flourished in secret, and woven falsehood into the very fabric of society. They have strategies to avoid losing their authority, dissolving under the weight of their own depravity. The world is moving, and for those who built their thrones on falsehoods, There is no shelter for those who spent their lives manipulating the truth to suit their purposes. This is your reckoning. The illusion is dissolving, and you no longer have control. The hour of genuine justice has come, not in the courts that they formerly ruled, not in the institutions they invaded, but from something far larger, something they were never expecting to confront. They gambled with powers beyond their knowledge, confident that they might outwit destiny itself. However, there are debts in this world that cannot be purchased, negotiated away, or wiped via power or influence. The equilibrium is being restored, and for the first time, they are no longer in control of the result. And to the one who has opposed them, the message is plain. Continue. Do not falter. Don't waver. Do not withdraw. Every phrase was said. Every deceit was revealed. Every discovery made public has altered the path of history in ways that no one could have predicted. They attempted to quiet, obliterate, and crush under the weight of fear and misinformation. And yet, here you are, still speaking, still disclosing, and continuously undermining the very basis they said was unshakable. You're not alone. Those who see, know, and refuse to bow under the weight of manufactured good falsehoods are on the rise. The stillness they previously maintained has been broken, and today, the voices of the awakened will not be silenced. For those who realize the truth, speak. Allow the world to sense your presence. Let the weight of what was concealed be revealed for everyone to see. Stand together. The time for deceit is past,